Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome. I think you are going to be in for a treat today. I really do find this to be very exciting things. We are releasing DISC. I am a huge fan, not only of the assessments themselves, but really understanding what goes into them. What is sort of the inner workings, the mindsets that go into them. And so I just have a quick question, and feel free if you want to use the chat or if you want to use a thumbs up or some sort of way to interact with me. How many of you have taken a DISC assessment before? How many of you have taken a DISC assessment? If it's easier to, okay, very good. Seeing some hand raisers. Excellent. And I like that some are like, nope, on the list. Good. This is what's so fun about this. I'm going to teach you a little bit about what goes into a DISC assessment, what goes into the profiles, and how it helps you to really find your authentic self. And so just if you haven't had a chance to meet me yet, I do a lot of our webinars. My name is Jay Pugh. I'm our vice president for the Center for Leadership and Development with New Horizons. I've been in this space for about 16 years. I've been in the leadership space for about 8. And so I love this stuff. I live and breathe leadership and development. This is really where my passion is. I do have a PhD in this space. And so I want us to really spend a little bit of time understanding how you can use something like a DISC profile or a DISC assessment and understand how you can learn more about yourself and then how you can learn how to connect with others. So that's really where I am. And so I use this not only in my professional life, I use this in my personal life. As you can see from this slide, I have 4 daughters. I have 2 adoptive and 2 biological daughters, and I use this to understand them. So it is a great way for us to see how this can work. And so just a little bit about DISC to start. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a sort of a thought-provoking question. How do you like to personally communicate with others? Do you like brief conversations? Do you like really open, human felt conversations? Do you like conversations that save time, or do you like to make a lot of time for others? Do you like to share a lot of personal stories? Do you like to just get down to the brass tacks? There is no wrong answer in this. I mean that with every fiber of my being. And it can depend on the situation. I can agree with that. But for you personally, if you were alone in a dark room, what would you prefer? I love what I'm seeing here. So you have Chad and Dave, to where that in itself is like, I like brief conversations. Other people are, do you know what? I love open communication. Jenny versus Summer. This is what I love here, is that it's good to know a little bit about what you prefer. And that's very good. And I love what I'm seeing is it's not that we can't shift for others, ladies and gentlemen. That's a big thing I love that we're understanding here is the situation pushes us to maybe shift our approaches, and that's perfectly okay. But the big thing that I want us to achieve with this is really understanding our authentic self. Really understanding what it is we prefer in the way we communicate. It doesn't mean that we don't shift to others or that we make approaches to others, but it is important to know what it is that we value. And that's, Danny, that's a perfect thing that I love that I just saw is I love asking questions, but I don't like talking about myself. That's what I want us to dive into and find in this hour. And that's where these DISC profiles can help us get to that a little bit sooner. So in the world of DISC, there are 4 major behavioral styles. However, there's a series of blends that exists on the DISC spectrum. So this can be anything to where maybe some people are more true I's or true D's in this case, which means that, hey, they really like the assertive dialogue, get to the point, be focused, be on point. And then there's others that might say, no, I like the persuasion. I like the story. I like the camaraderie of the approach. And then you might have people, and we'll talk about each of these styles as a whole more in detail, but there might be people that are, I don't want to talk about me at all. I really want to get to know you and I want to support you. And that's more of where the S style comes in. And then there's C's, which is, I just want to get to what the facts say. I want to remove feelings from this. I just want to get to what the facts and the information says. So this is where this wheel tells us a little bit more about what is comfortable for us in communication. Now, I don't believe that in any assessment that should ever be taken that we fit in a box. I don't believe we do. I believe we are adaptable human beings that are complex creatures. But I do think understanding where we are most comfortable gives us a good jumping off point to understand. So where DISC comes into play is that there's 4 major areas of focus. Now, we have multiple blends of this in the way that we sit. The first piece of this is D for dominant. And dominant means that you are direct, you are focused, you are to the point, you're assertive with your communication. Directness is the most key pivotal piece that comes into play. So this is known as the dominant style. I want you to think for a minute, when you're hearing the dominant style, what's the first sort of proponent that comes to your mind? Whether it's areas of concern, areas of strength, the way they like to interact, what comes to your mind whenever you're seeing a dominant communicator? How many of you know somebody that's of that way? Rigid, old school, right to it, direct. They will talk about themselves a little bit more. Believe it or not, Lindsay, D is not the one that mostly talks about themselves. There's one that does it a little bit more, but you're right that they do relate with their own ideas. Yes. Strong-willed, specific to details. They have a tendency to take over conversation. They might not be as good of a listener. Very fair to say, David. Commander could be firing directions. They speak their mind. They might not seem very kind in approach. They might not let others talk as much. They might not be as open. They might be a little bit more guarded. It might not be intended, but it might cause intimidation. They might be aggressive. They're confident. I like that, Nikki, that there's a little bit, yes, I will say, Samil, that one of the biggest things is that impatience is a big thing with a D. What are their strengths? I saw confident. What strengths come out with having a D style? They are clear. They take challenges. They get to decisions quickly. They GSD. They do. They get stuff done. They know what they want. Very good points. Excellent job with that. And they can be pretty influential because they've already visualized the path. Very, very good here. Excellent job, everybody. So with this, Ds typically do take charge. They are decisive risk takers. They're fearless. They are confident. They are the most confident of the group. And they do ensure bottom line results. They are about getting to the bottom line. That is absolutely what they do best. So in communication, if you're like, hey, we need a decision done and need to get to it quickly, you do want to communicate with a D. A D might not be the nicest of people, but they are the people that will tell you this is how this should get done. They are effective in that way. However, what's really hard for them is being repetitive or saying the same things over. Diplomacy is not, they don't need what is called the kumbaya approach. They don't need the, hey, is everybody okay with this? Are we comfortable with that? That's not necessarily their approach. Rules and regulations. They are people that look to clear a roadway. And they're not one that's going to open up about their personal lives very much. They're not. They are a little bit more guarded in that. They are not shy, but that's why I say that whenever they say they talk about themselves, they won't talk about their personal selves very often. They focus on the professional versions of themselves more. Excellent. So that's the first part of the D style. So how many of you know, by a raising of a hand, how many of you know somebody that is that way? Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. We'll lower the hands for a minute. How many of you would say you probably are? And Lindsay's like sister-in-law, right? The in-laws. And so, Robbie, I like that a little bit, right? Me, but I'm okay sharing private info. And this is where the blends come in, right? We're going to talk about blending a little bit. Who would say they are more of this person by a raising of hands? That this is kind of how you would prefer to communicate. Very good. So that's a pretty fair say. We're seeing about 6 to 7. That's very good. That's where we'll fall into this. We're going to see where we feel most comfortable. And some of them, once again, we're not going to say we fit in a box, because just because one is one way doesn't mean you might not fit in another. All right, let's talk the second one. The influencing styles. These are charismatic people. They are more open with people. They are jovial. They are storytellers. They are people that really do like to rally the troops together, if you will. What areas of strengths do you think they have? How do you think they prefer to communicate? What areas of concern do you think they have? They are persuasive. They like to instill trust. They're positive communicators, team builders. They can appear empathetic. They try to make things excited. They're wooers, if you will. They try to get multiple people's opinions. Informal confusion. They care what other people think about them. They're outgoing. They're cheerleaders. They try to explain the why. Absolutely. I would say that if D's are more of what people, what do we know? What do we understand? What do we see? I's are more about why does this matter? Why does this care, right? And they are care about being understood. Now, I'm seeing strengths in this area. What are the areas of concern? They don't make decisions very quickly. They talk too much. I would say that's where the people that will talk about themselves the most are I's, because they use relatability and they talk about themselves more. So I's will do that. That is an area. They get caught into the weeds. They might not care about facts. They don't necessarily care about the facts as much. They don't care about process. They can sometimes come off as salesy, Lindsay. And sometimes they will overly worry about people's feelings, so that might be hard to make decisions. I will say the one area of concern about an I more than anything else is their lack of organization. Because they do want to make everybody happy, because they do want to rah-rah, because they do want people to be there, their organization sometimes creates restriction. So they are inspirers. They think fast on their feet. They are the most creative of the bunch. I will honestly say that. They are full of ideas. They are great with promoting opportunities and people. They really do look out for people. The challenge is sometimes they can go down the rabbit holes, the rabbit trails, if you will. And they can sometimes fall in, if that's where authenticity really comes into play. They have to genuinely see an I style being that way over and over and over again for it to be real. That's why people don't always believe trainers or teachers or things like that. So they sometimes get caught up in routines that aren't very effective. They aren't very formal with keeping detailed records or organization. They get bored easily. I don't want to say that, I don't know if anybody watches TikToks or anything, but they kind of have golden retriever energy sometimes, right? They're like, what are we going to do next? Let's go do it. And that's where they move. So they like to move quickly and they love to move on to the next thing. They don't ever like to redo things. So that can be very tough for people that are process oriented. And they like control the environment. They do like to, but they control it more in the space of the team environment rather than the results part of the environment. And Scott, there's a right circumstance for all of these. That's the best part about it. All 4 of these are going to have great advantages and they're going to have great areas of concern that have to be mindful. So there is no best answer for this. That's the thing about this. It is truly an understanding of what it is that you bring to the table that is meaningful and effective, and things to where you have to be mindful of your blind spots. You have to be able to have that. So I always like to share this first. I am more of a DI. That is where I live more often. I lead with D more than anything else, and then I have a pretty high I blend with it. So if I'm falling on this wheel, this is about where I fall overall on this wheel, right? Now, I have to be very mindful because I do move fast. I do push things pretty quickly. At the same time, I have to know to slow down sometimes. And that's an important fabric. Sometimes being overly enthusiastic doesn't work. So that's where being mindful of my blind spots is a very important piece. You have to be able to do it. All right, let's shift into the S style. The S style. What do we think? They are supportive, steady like a rock. They are compassionate. What kind of value, areas of strength, areas of concern? How do they prefer to communicate? What do you think they have? Empathetic. They are great listeners. Absolutely. I will say S's are the best of listeners. They care about people. Absolutely. Much like I's, they do care about people. They hear all sides of the story. They're inclusive. They're helpful. They do. They want to help. Very supportive. They want to be included. They lack decision making. I will tell you that. That is their one area of concern, is that they don't want to make decisions. They are the people that if you have a relationship, if you're married to one, they're the people that when you ask them where they want to eat, they go, I don't care. Where do you want to eat? And they do that, right? That is their MO. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? They will not make a decision. They are very loyal. They're very loyal. They want stability. Excellent. So yes, from a strength side, they're very empathetic. They're very kind. They're very supportive. They're amazing listeners. They are kumbaya people. They like to keep camaraderie. Concerns, though, they don't like change. They take too long to get to action. They can appear as a flip-flopper. They like steady routine. They are uncomfortable with change. Out of any group, S's have the toughest time with change because they fear it might hurt people. And they don't want people to hurt. So that's a big thing. With S's, they are somebody that is harmonizers. They're sensitive. They're friendly. They build networks. They're coordinators. They're cooperators. And so the thing is, though, is that they don't like things that are competition driven. They don't like things that are unfriendly or that seem like it's too aggressive. That's why D's and S's don't click all the time. They don't like change. They don't like contrary opinions. They are very much, can we all just get along? And they do stay in the lane, right? They don't take risks. That's another area. So Cindy, I will say this, they won't get along if they're not mindful of the blind spots. They won't get along if they're not mindful of the blind spots. And what's really funny, Cindy, I'm so glad you brought this up, is I guarantee you married somebody that is quite the opposite of you or somewhere in some capacity. So if you probably are more of a DI, you probably married somebody that's in the SC range. And if you're somebody that's in the SC range or an IS range, you probably married somebody very analytical. That's the reason why that is because you see the value in somebody. And that's right, Jeff. And that's the thing, is it's both. The answer is both, right? And where it is you have to see the value in the other, and then you have to be able to recognize the blind spots of your own. So as a DI, I have to recognize the true meaningful value of an SC, which is the empathy, which is the support, which is the kindness, which is the process, which is the slowing down of things. I love that about them. And at the same time, I have to recognize my own blind spots with it. The more that you do that in your authentic self, ladies and gentlemen, the more that you will gravitate more people to you in the way that you communicate. That's why it matters. Let's go to C's now. And we're going to talk about which one you kind of feel like you might fall into. And Danny, I love this question. I'm going to hold off on that question for the meantime. The short answer is 150% yes. Absolutely, you can shift in your profiles. Absolutely. But I want to talk about that more in detail in a little bit. Conscientious style. These are your analytical minds. These are your process people. These are your 1, 2s, and 3s. These are the people that enjoy a good manual, a good operations manual, a good standard operating procedure. They love this stuff. So what is an area of strength? Or what are areas of concern? They are great evaluators. They are efficient. They are detail-oriented. They are the most organized of the group. They like to have things done by the book. They have predictability, which could be an advantage and a disadvantage. They could be rigid. They take time to think things through. Documentation's an advantage. They get caught in weeds. They don't like surprises. They take time to do it right. Very good. Black and white thinking. Absolutely. They may not make up. They are not going to make the decision. They're going to just present the facts. Allie, I love what you said. Their biggest weakness, and Fawn said it too, and Melissa. Oh, I like myopic in the approach. That's very good, Samil. Yes. They are analysis paralysis, but they are very reliable. They are reliable sources. So the advantage is that they are extremely organized. They're planners. They're quick to think, but they are very slow to think. They are methodical. That is a great advantage of them, is they are methodical and reliable. They plan to meet expectations. The challenge is when unpredictability happens. They get wildly uncomfortable. They don't like to share about themselves in any capacity. They don't like to work in groups. And the reason why is because they think that will provide too many issues to the context rather than just providing the steps. And they really struggle when there's a lack of clarity. Jeff, many C's, they're not big on physical contact. They are the most guarded of the group. Yes, that is very fair. Whereas I's, I always say I's are touchers. I's are the people that love high fives, fist bumps, hugs, and all of the above. Yeah, they like that a little bit more. So I guess my question is before we get into this question, where do you think you sit first and foremost? Where do you think you sit on this wheel? And it could be a blend. You could say, do you know what? I think I'm more of a CD, or I'm more of an IS, an SC blend, definite C, D's or C's, S's and C's, I's and S's. C's, but maybe not the manuals. But David, you might like to create the steps in those manuals. DC's, DI, DIS, DS, I. Look at this. Lean D, but probably have I's and S's in there. That's very true. Love what I'm seeing. I like Brandon says DIC, right? Very good. It's funny, I have IS, but also C. Do you know what's really fun about this, folks? What the DISC assessment and these workshops do, which are DISC workshop, what it allows us to do is it allows you to take the assessments beforehand, and it comes with this massive, massive comprehensive report. It's about probably 40 pages. However, one of my favorite pieces of this is understanding where you sit on the wheel. And now you're going to see two different styles to this. And what that means is that the first one, which is your circle, is who you are if you had nobody else to influence you on situation. It is your natural tendency. And what that means is right now I am DI with some C built in. So that's where I live. I am DI with some C built in. However, because of my job, because of my life situations, because of my role, you'll notice that I actually shift in my approach to other people. And I shift more towards the ID space and almost more of an IDC space, believe it or not. I shift a little bit more to an IDC space. My C is still very close. So I shift more into the ID space. And where this comes, and Christy, right? That's where it shifts into the work, is shifting to that. So we have that blend in what we're doing. So what happens is our roles do shift us. And yes, I would say, Samil, the answer to that question is yes, we do have a I don't call it dominant and secondary. I call it natural and adapted, which means our natural is if you close the door, you turned off the lights, and you were your most authentic self, the most authentic version of you, I would be a DI then C. Yes, that's where I would live if I was alone in a dark room. That's the authentic self. And then you have your adapted self, which is who you need to be for others, who you need to be in the situations. And I love that somebody said it earlier, and I'm going to go back in the chat. Somebody said it, and I loved what you said. You said trainers. Trainers are your eyes. And yeah, I have to, I've been in the teaching space for 16 years, and you have to shift yourself to be more of an eye space. And so I love that. It's very true, but I still kind of keep the D approach with it. So where I live is in a space of assertiveness and persuasiveness. That's really kind of where I love to live. But I do shift. This is what I love about the DISC assessment, is when you take the DISC assessment, you learn about where you're comfortable, and then you learn about where the shifts to other people happen. And I love this. Now, in addition, this report comes with a myriad of other things. It shows you kind of when to communicate with people, what it is you prefer and what it is you don't prefer. It tells you about what your wants and needs are, what you bring to the organization. It talks about, where your tendencies have a tendency to shift. It is a great report, but we teach this in the report and what it is we focus on. So I love doing this, and then we have a workshop around this to where we understand how to make teams work with it too. So that leads me to this question, which then becomes, what different factors do you think come into play in how others communicate? How do you use, what kind of clues or cues do you use to better communicate with others? What kind of clues and cues? How do you pick up on others, whether they sit in those places? Body language, love that, Jacqueline. Facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, one. Situational practice, you're right, Jenny, right? Of under pressure situations. How quickly they reply. Ooh, Cindy, love that. They might get straight to the point, or they may slow down conversation. Asking questions if we're unsure. I love that, Mark. Chit chat, language, eye contact, verbiage. Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a few quick, and yeah, how do you like to receive communication? Allie, I will tell you that one thing I genuinely love to do with people is if they're having a problem, I ask them what they want from the conversation. Hey, before we dive in, real quick, what do you need from me? Do you need a solution? Do you need a quick fix? Do you need advice? Or do you need to just vent this one out? I love asking that question because then it allows me to understand the way they prefer to communicate, and it allows me to not step on my own trap. Anybody ever try to give somebody a fix to a solution that they weren't asking for? Guilty. So I ask. So ask people how they want to be listened to. Kristen, see, look, this can apply to marriage counseling too. See how that works? So I'll give you a few quick tips and tricks for today on how it is you can be able to read other people and what to look for. The first piece of this that I find to be beneficial is what I call the indirect versus the direct scale. What this means is pace. Look at how quickly they move through things. There are account executives that I work with that will send me something and then they immediately say, oh, I actually meant to say this, or hey, forget that, I meant this. That lets me know that they are going to be more on the D and the I scale than the S and the C scale. Whereas S's and C's will take their sweet time to get me information, but it will be detailed. It will be 1s, 2s, and 3s, or it will be paragraph format. Anybody know the people that write in paragraphs? There we go. Right. And Kristen, that's where S's live. And let me ask you this, Kristen, are you more of an S style, would you say? SC with I tendency. See, there it is, right? So that's the paragraph people. Whereas if you're looking, so pace, the people that move quickly, pay attention to how quick they move with conversation. If they move very quickly, they are more likely to prefer D and I communication. And Christy, I love what you said. When you need to be informational, that's one thing. But when you are in your preference of communication, that's where we go in. My preference of communication is more of a D style. Tell me what you need, tell me why you need it, and tell me when you need it by. And that's exactly right, Scott. It is very, very important for you to know, when we talk about this, Scott, this is a really important fabric of this dialogue. It is very important to shift your communication to the situation. One thing I always say, though, is how do you know where you're shifting if you don't know where you're standing to begin with? How do you know if you're hitting your targets if you don't know where you're starting? And that's why it's so important to know your authentic self first, right? It's important to know your authentic self. So for me, I know that I prefer quick, decisive communication, but then I look directly to the other and say, how do they prefer to be communicated? How do they prefer? What is their way that they love to be communicated with? But you got to know where you're sitting first. You got to know where your authentic self is first. And I like where this said, and I'm going to go back to Christy, I need very clear and concise. Beating around the bush doesn't work, and that's huge. And so this is where Jeff brings up a good point. I usually, as a DC, we pick up inconsistency, right? And that's a big thing, is that you have to understand what it is you find to be beneficial. And then I love what Selena just said, which was, know your audience and how you shift. So it's a twofold approach. It is your ability to gain what we call true self-awareness, true self-awareness of the way you prefer to communicate to start. And that is important. It is very important. You can't ignore that. You can't just say, well, I just communicate depending on the situation. Because if you only do that, then what happens is we run into a lot of identity crisis when you're working on your own items by yourself. Then we go, well, what do I need? I don't know what I need. What do I actually? So it really is important to understand your authentic self first. Then the adaptation is really important. Then that's what we call self-regulation. And DISC ties so much to emotional intelligence. It's unbelievable. Self-regulation is such a critical component because it's so important to know, I prefer this type of communication, but if I'm shifting to communicate with Brandon's boss, she doesn't want directness. She wants kindness. She is more of an IS style. So I need to slow down a moment and I need to demonstrate kindness and I need to share support. So I have to shift that approach. But she also is so self-aware and self-regulatory that if she needs something from me, she gets down to brass tacks. And that's why we have the best relationship on the planet. I love working with her because we have both of those self-awareness pieces and self-regulatory pieces. And you're right, Jeff. That's a big thing that I'm going to talk about in just a few moments. After we talk about the reading of it, I'm going to talk about where energy comes into play. And thank you, Bray. I appreciate that follow-up because we do know exactly how to communicate with their needs, but we also know exactly what we prefer to. So the rule of thumb I always ask is this. Who's doing the asking? If I'm doing the asking, I'm going to shift. If you're doing the asking, you should shift. So that's where we pay attention. The second thing that I pay attention to is not pace and speed, but it's actually priority. And is priority driven more on results and task? Or is it driven more in people? And empathy? Which is it drawn more in? If you notice people don't share a lot about their personal lives, or they don't share a lot of what they did this weekend, or how many of you know the people that will ask you this is a favorite question of mine. How many of you know the people that say, hey, what'd you do this weekend? And you're like, oh, I really don't want to get into this. I don't want to get into this. How many of you genuinely prefer small talk? Genuinely prefer small talk? This is a perfect example. And if we have the time, great. And that's a good point. See, and this is where this comes into play. Some people prefer it because it creates more of a proponent of people and empathy, whereas others are GSD mode. So pay attention to, are they guarded or are they more wide open? Are they guarded or are they more open? Are they an open book or are they a little bit more protective? And that's it. And Chrissy, if you're saying you don't mind it, there's a difference between saying you prefer it and you don't mind it. There's a key difference between those two. So that's why we want to be mindful. So where this comes into play is that if people are more direct but guarded, they're a little bit more on the D side, which means they'll get to the point, but they're not going to share all their ins and outs about themselves. I's are more direct, but they're more open. They're going to share a relatable story. I will say I's are the storytellers more than anything else. They will share a story on what they did over the weekend. They will share a story about something that's relatable to somebody else. They will talk about their story to create that. That's an I. So that's where, if they're direct, they move fast. But then the difference between a D and an I is that D's will be more direct, I's will be more open. S's and C's, when we get to a C style, they are more indirect but guarded, which means they just want to get the facts. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm not going to do this. Here are the facts. Here are the facts. Here's what we know. Feelings aside, we're not going to get into feelings. We're not getting into empathy right this second. Feelings need to be put aside. Here's what we know. That is guarded but indirect. And S's are very open but indirect. They're very open, very supportive, very kind, very empathetic. However, they don't want to see anybody hurt, so they're not going to speak up. They're going to be a hair more passive than assertive in this case. If somebody's feelings are going to get hurt, They're going to be very, very, very cautious. So that's how I typically try to read those approaches in this. That's two of the quicker ways you can see other people. So in this case, this is kind of how you can read this. And this is something that comes with the report, is that you can see, how are we reading this? Are they going to more direct and guarded, direct and open? Are they more indirect and guarded? Or are they more indirect and open? And that's how we can be able to tell. And in these workshops, we help you find it. We help you find what that looks like, and then provide the strategies to communicate. What is it they prefer in their communication? What it is that we can re-strategize in those approaches. So it's really cool in the way that that works. Now, I had one key question that I think is going to be really important. And going back to, I believe Danny asked this, and Danny said, can this change over time? And the answer is 150%. Our life events change us. I would say that if you haven't taken a DISC assessment in the last 2 years, I would definitely take it, because our life events change us. Marriages, children, job changes, role changes, department changes. If you've become a leader, it shifts and change. Those changes shift the way that we become more natural in our approaches. As our situations change on a daily basis, the more comfortable we become with that natural style. I will tell you that in my past life, and I've taken the DISC assessment 3 times in my life. The first 2, it didn't really change. I was more of an IS type of person. I was an open book. I was very open, kind. And yes, I do think the natural can change as much as the adaptable. I don't think it changes as much, Christy, but I think that it can really stick and shift over time. So I don't think it's just as fluctuating as that happens. I think if you take it 6 months from now, it might be the same. But I think 3 years, if you have 2 kids and you got married, it might shift. And it might stay shifted for a while. So I think when we talk about this DISC style, over time, and I've had several daughters, as I mentioned, I have 4 daughters, and I thought that maybe it might have softened me up, but actually it has made me much more direct and more straightforward. My wife is very supportive. So because she's so supportive and kind and understanding, I can be the person that's like, no, you're going to be strong, independent women that's going to make a name for yourself, and you're going to do great things and push yourself and create new boundaries and like, that's where, so my role has shifted me more into a D role. And I think those life events do change us. So if you say, hey, I took this 6 years ago, I highly recommend taking it again. And if your team has or hasn't taken it, I would highly recommend it, because it creates such a more efficient advantage in knowing how people prefer to communicate and knowing exactly how to get things done faster while still showing the kindness and openness that it deserves. So with that said, I always like to leave a good 10 minutes or so to questions, to other Q&A that I can help provide for you. What questions do we have? So Samil, if you're interested in taking the DISC assessment yourself, reach out to your account executive. They can definitely set you up with that. I would say that if you're interested in a workshop for your team, they can also help with that. We are running an open enrollment delivery on September 28th and 29th. I would say if you're interested in doing that, reach out to your account executive. Reach out to your account manager. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining. Other questions we have. I get questions like, Have they changed? Like, can they change over time? I do get that question. I get questions of, is it good to always be adaptable? Is it good to always be adaptable? And once again, the answer to that question is it's important to know your authentic self first, and then it's good to know what adaptations you make. Oh, thank you, Martin. Christy, can you usually call it by just meeting someone? No, but I think you can get a good feeler out there. I think you can get a good feeler, and then it's okay to ask those kind of questions. Do you prefer to get things done? Or do you prefer to talk things out? Do you prefer to openly collaborate, or do you prefer to work on your own and then come back to the table? I think it's okay to do that, but I think it's good to also read in the beginning to get a feel about that. So Jeff, and correct me if this is the case, when you're saying flatliners, do you mean to where, if I go back to this report, if you will, do you mean people that fall right in this middle? Do you mean people that fall really close in the middle of this? Or do you mean people that are way, okay. So when it's really hard to tell in that case and they're fully adaptable, I will tell you that when I've taught these workshops, it has been very common that those people are typically the most adaptable human beings on the planet, but they struggle the most with what they prefer. They have a lot of internal struggle. They actually have the hardest time finding their authentic self. So for you, it's really hard to read them if they can't even read themselves. So with people like that in the workshops, I actually work with them to start asking them those deeper, detailed questions. And then they start to understand, you know what, deep down, I kind of do prefer this a little bit more. I'm still going to adapt to people all the time, but at least I know that I do prefer this a little bit. How much should we expect? Oh, great question, Chad. How much should we expect work teams to accommodate all styles? I think if they're going to learn, then it's where I call it exposure. My personal preference in life, this is the Dr. Pugh EPR model, and I've written it in my book, is exposure, practice, and reflection. I'm a huge proponent that once you learn it, you should really expose yourself to it. And we should expect the exposure. Now, with the exposure, we shouldn't expect it to be perfect. We should expect practice with it. We should expect reflection with it. So whenever I say how much should we expect work teams to accommodate, if we're not exposing them to this first, then the expectation is very little. But if we expose them to this, then the practice and the reflection should be where we gear our attention. That's my EPR model. That's in the Conquering of 7 C's. That's what I focus my attention to. Anytime that I'm exposing something new to new people, that's where I go. That's how we gain confidence, Chad. And efficacy. Great question. Fantastic question. Any final questions, folks? All right. I do want to thank you so much for joining this webinar. However, I do want you to stay on for just a moment. Brandon has something he wants to share with you all before we hop off, but I genuinely want to thank you for joining me on this webinar. I've had such a blast with you all, so thank you. And if you are more interested, please reach out.
Thank you so much, Jay. I would love if we can, everyone's already doing it, putting applauses, saying thank yous, all of that. Thank you so much, Jay. We always truly enjoy being able to have you present and really share all of your thoughts with us. So thank you so much. As we finish up this webinar, we just want to thank you all for attending today. It has truly been a joy having you, having your thoughts, the discussion in the chat, all of that. As you leave this webinar today, you're going to be asked a 1-question survey saying, would you like to continue the conversation? Like Jay was talking about just a little bit ago, there's a lot that we're doing with DISC within New Horizons. If you're interested in all of that, or even just one part of it, whatever it may be, say yes to that question. we can then get you connected with the right people to be able to discuss this as to what your needs are, what your company's needs are, all of that. And we can then help you get the right resources. So go ahead and say yes to that question. As always, follow us on LinkedIn. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But we want to just thank you all so much for attending today. We do have one other webinar this month that is revolving around DISC. So you are welcome to join that one also. You can go on to newhorizons.com/events and sign up for that one. It's going to be with Hamish McFarland. So it's going to be a great webinar also. But thank you all so much for coming today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.